The photograph slipped from her trembling fingers and landed face up on the kitchen table, and in that single moment, 7 years of silence cracked open inside my chest. It was a picture of a little girl with dark curls, laughing beneath a bright afternoon sun, her tiny hands wrapped around a puppy almost bigger than she was. Behind her stood a woman whose face I knew better than my own reflection once upon a time. My ex. And standing beside her was a man I had never seen before. Then my ex's mother looked at me with eyes full of something between sorrow and hope and quietly asked, "Want to see?" I didn't even blink. Before we begin, if you believe that kindness deserves a second chance and that some broken bonds can still be mended, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing where you're watching from, share this story with someone who believes in healing, and subscribe to A Journey of Hearts for more unforgettable journeys of love, loss, and redemption. There was a time when I believed love alone could carry two people through anything. At 24, I had fallen hopelessly in love with Serena Whitmore. She was unlike anyone I had ever met. She painted murals on abandoned walls, sang old songs while washing dishes, and collected postcards from cities she had never visited. She dreamed loudly. I dreamed carefully. She wanted to travel across continents. I wanted a stable job, a mortgage, and predictable weekends. Somehow our differences fit together like pieces from entirely different puzzles that still managed to create a beautiful picture. For 4 years we built a life inside a tiny apartment overlooking a busy avenue where buses rattled by every morning. We survived unpaid bills. We survived my father's illness. We survived her failed attempt at opening an art studio. We survived every argument about money and every disagreement about priorities. At least I thought we had. Until the night everything collapsed. I had just been promoted at work. It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead it became the ending. Serena sat across from me at our dining table, her hands clasped tightly together. She looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had been carrying an invisible burden for months. She told me she felt trapped. She said she no longer recognized herself. She said I had become more focused on building a future than enjoying the present. I argued. I defended myself. I reminded her about sacrifices. About responsibilities. About security. She cried. I grew angry. And then she said something that still echoed inside my mind years later. She said she loved me. But she wasn't happy anymore. A month later she was gone. She packed her things while I was at work. She left behind only a short letter. No accusations. No blame. Just gratitude for the years we shared and an apology for not being strong enough to stay. I never replied. I never called. Pride can be a strange prison. It convinces you that silence is dignity when in reality silence is often just fear wearing expensive clothes. For years I convinced myself I had moved on. I changed apartments. Changed jobs. Changed routines. Friends introduced me to other women. Some were kind. Some were beautiful. Some genuinely cared. But every relationship ended before it truly began because a small part of me remained frozen in that apartment where Serena had once danced barefoot in the kitchen. Eventually I stopped trying. At 35 my life looked successful from the outside. I managed a regional office. I drove a decent car. I owned a townhouse. Yet every evening I returned to rooms filled with furniture but empty of warmth. Weekends became longer. Birthdays became quieter. And holidays became unbearable. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon I received a phone call. The number was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it. Something made me answer. The voice belonged to Judith Whitmore. Serena's mother. 7 years had passed since we last spoke. She sounded older. Fragile. She asked if I could visit her. She wouldn't explain why. Only that it was important. I nearly refused. Old wounds rarely appreciate being reopened. But curiosity has a way of overpowering common sense. The following Saturday I drove to the same neighborhood where Serena had grown up. Nothing seemed to have changed. The same flower shop stood on the corner. The same bakery filled the street with the scent of fresh bread. The same oak tree shaded the front yard. Judith opened the door before I knocked. Her hair had become completely silver. Fine wrinkles framed her gentle smile. Yet her eyes remained exactly as I remembered. Warm. Observant. Patient. She hugged me as though no time had passed. Inside the house everything felt painfully familiar. Family photographs lined the hallway. Paintings Serena created during college still hung on the walls. The clock above the fireplace ticked softly. Judith brewed tea and spoke about ordinary things. Weather. Neighbors. Her arthritis. I waited for her to explain why I was there. Instead she disappeared into another room. When she returned she carried an old wooden box. She placed it carefully on the table. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Sketchbooks. Postcards. Photographs. She picked up the photograph of the little girl and dropped it onto the table. Then she smiled sadly. Want to see? I nodded. Judith explained that Serena had moved across the country shortly after leaving me. She had married a musician named Elliot. Together they had a daughter named Maeve. For a while life seemed beautiful. Until tragedy arrived. Elliot died in a traffic accident 3 years earlier. Serena never truly recovered. Depression swallowed her slowly. She stopped painting. Stopped singing. Stopped answering phone calls. She focused entirely on raising Maeve. But even that became difficult. Judith's eyes filled with tears. 3 months ago Serena had been diagnosed with an aggressive autoimmune disease. Doctors believed treatment could help. But emotionally she had already surrendered. She isolated herself from everyone. Including her own mother. Except recently. She had begun sorting through old belongings. And among them she found letters. Dozens of letters. Letters she wrote but never mailed. Letters addressed to me. Judith handed me the first envelope. My fingers trembled. The letter was dated 6 years earlier. Serena wrote about regretting how she left. She admitted she expected me to chase after her. She confessed she waited months hoping I would appear at her door. When I didn't, she convinced herself I never truly loved her. But over time she realized she had been unfair. She acknowledged my sacrifices. My devotion. My loyalty. Another letter described her wedding day. She wrote that Elliot was kind. Gentle. Supportive. But she felt guilty because part of her heart still belonged somewhere else. Another letter spoke about becoming a mother. She described holding Maeve for the first time and understanding what unconditional love meant. Then came letters filled with grief after Elliot's death. Loneliness. Fear. Exhaustion. And finally the most recent letter. Written just 2 weeks before. She said illness had forced her to confront unfinished chapters. She admitted she spent years wondering what life would have looked like if we had fought harder for each other. She didn't expect forgiveness. She didn't expect friendship. She simply hoped I was happy. I finished reading with tears running freely down my face. Judith reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She told me Serena was staying at a rehabilitation center outside the city. She wasn't eating properly. She barely spoke. Doctors worried she had lost the will to recover. Judith believed there was one person capable of reminding her that she mattered. Me. At first I refused. Not because I hated Serena, but because I feared seeing what time and suffering had done to someone I once adored. Memory preserves people perfectly. Reality rarely cooperates. For days I wrestled with the decision. I barely slept. I reread every letter. I remembered every shared laugh. Every argument. Every dream. Eventually I realized something profound. Love doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it simply changes shape. It becomes quieter. Less demanding. More forgiving. So I went. The rehabilitation center overlooked a small lake surrounded by maple trees. Sunlight reflected across the water. Birds drifted lazily overhead. It was a beautiful day. A day completely indifferent to human sorrow. A nurse guided me toward a garden. And there she was. Sitting alone on a bench. Thinner. Paler. Her shoulders slumped beneath a cardigan that looked too large for her. Yet even after 7 years I recognized her instantly. She stared at the flowers without noticing me. I sat beside her. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then she turned. Her eyes widened. Shock. Disbelief. And then tears. The kind of tears people shed when they encounter something they thought they had permanently lost. She apologized. Again and again. For leaving. For hurting me. For disappearing. I apologized too. For my pride. For allowing silence to become stronger than love. We talked for hours. About mistakes. About growing older. About grief. About Maeve. About Elliot. She told me he had been a wonderful husband. She loved him deeply. And I understood. Because hearts are capable of holding more than one meaningful love. Loving someone else never erased what we once shared. And understanding that finally freed me. Over the following weeks I visited often. Sometimes we simply watched ducks swimming across the lake. Sometimes I read stories to Maeve while Serena rested. The little girl reminded me of her mother. Creative. Curious. Endlessly energetic. Slowly Serena changed. She began eating more. She attended therapy sessions. She painted again. At first only tiny sketches. Then full landscapes. Color returned to her cheeks. Laughter returned to her voice. One afternoon she handed me a painting. It showed two people standing on opposite sides of a river. Between them stretched a fragile wooden bridge. Above it she had written a single sentence. People don't always need to go back. Sometimes they only need permission to move forward. Months passed. Treatment worked better than expected. Her condition stabilized. Maeve started school. Judith visited regularly. Life remained imperfect. There were difficult days. Hospital appointments. Moments of fear. Unexpected setbacks. But there was also hope. And hope can accomplish extraordinary things. One evening Serena and I sat watching the sunset over the lake. She thanked me for returning. She admitted she once believed she deserved to suffer for her choices. I told her suffering was never payment. Growth was. Forgiveness was. Choosing to keep living despite pain was. She smiled. The same smile that once made me believe anything was possible. And for the first time in many years I felt completely at peace. Not because we reunited romantically. We didn't. Not because every wound healed. Some scars remain forever. But because we finally gave each other what had been missing all along. Closure. Compassion. And another chance to become better versions of ourselves. Today Maeve calls me Uncle Rowan. Judith sends me homemade cookies every month. And Serena sells paintings online while continuing treatment. Sometimes we laugh about our younger selves. About how stubborn we were. About how many years we wasted protecting our pride. Life taught us that losing someone doesn't always mean losing them forever. Sometimes people return not to restart an old story but to finish it with kindness. And perhaps that is enough. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment telling us whether you believe old wounds can truly heal, and subscribe to A Journey of Hearts so more people can discover stories that remind us all of the power of forgiveness. Special request, comment, healing begins with one step. If you believe it is never too late to choose compassion over regret. As I drove away from the rehabilitation center one bright afternoon, I glanced into the rearview mirror and saw Serena standing beside Maeve near the garden gate. They waved until my car disappeared around the bend. And in that moment I finally understood something I had spent years trying to learn. Some people enter our lives to stay forever. Others leave. Some come back. Some don't. But every person we truly love leaves behind a light. And even after the darkest nights, if we are brave enough to look for it, that light still finds a way to guide us home.